Thank you. And at last, our speaker, and I'll try to be brief. You would think that I wouldn't need to Google Craig Weinaug, but I decided to.
That was a mistake.
Discovered that he's a Lawrence person. He graduated from Lawrence High in 1970, and I was quite impressed. He's one of us who grew up in the area, left, and then returned, because after that he went to school at Baylor and then got a degree from KU in public administration, master's. Has been a city manager at least, help, is a Bible name, I keep forgetting it, in Illinois.
Zion, Illinois.
Zion, there we go. And Ardmore, Oklahoma. And the really significant contribution to Lawrence, he's been county administrator in Lawrence since 1992. So it's a good many years to grow up with us. I had heard an earlier version, I think, of what some of the things Craig will be talking about. When we mentioned the county jail, its overcrowding, and also some of the county responsibilities for mental health in collaboration with Bert Nash. So one of the topics that came up in a sort of zany Sunday school class we all belonged to was, do we make the jail larger, or do we do something for the prisoners who are there simply because they need a place that's safe for them and others? And so Craig has been working on that. There's a larger committee that he's part of, Justice Matters, and perhaps you can tell us more about that. They've done some traveling and looked at other policies. So we're looking forward to anything he wants to share with us today. And Craig, anything I left out, you just put in.
Margaret, most of the stuff you left out, I'm glad you left out. There's always a risk coming home to your hometown to be a county administrator or city manager. There are people that knew you when you grew up. And there are things that people do when they grow up that don't lend to your credibility if you're the county administrator or city manager. And some of those are coming to mind now, but I'll spare you. I want to give you a little bit of history.
Would you rather have a podium?
No, because I like to prowl
Okay.
as far as I can prowl here. I want to give you a little bit of history. When I got here in '92, I met Bill Arnold. He was part of a jail committee talking about expanding a facility that we had in the back of the law enforcement facility that was 40 beds. And as a result of 2 or 3 years of process, we built a jail that at the time we built it was 196 beds. At that time, Bill was consistent with who he is now. He heard a little bit better than he does now, but he was a strong advocate for why we shouldn't be expanding the jail. When we went through all that work, mental health was not a significant issue in the context of the county jail. The state provided a number of mental health facilities, significant number of beds. But from '92 to currently, not only the state of Kansas, but states all over the country have cut back the number of mental health beds. We now have about 200 beds left, and I think at that time we probably had 800 or 900. I may not have the high number correct, but I know the number's down to 200 in 2 facilities. The philosophy was that those people are better treated through community facilities. Okay, so it had a high-sounding objective, but at the same time, over the last, from like the year 2000 to 2007, 2008, the state, instead of putting more money into community mental health centers, reduced the amount of money in community health centers. Over a period of about 7 years, the amount of annual state subsidy that Bert Nash received from the state was reduced by something in the neighborhood of $900,000 annually. That's not a one-time cut, that's an annual process. Now, a couple other things have happened after that. We had some major calamities nationally where a lot of people died because somebody hadn't gotten appropriate mental health treatment. And so suddenly it was no longer politically acceptable to cut back the support for mental health facilities. And so the support then that the state of Kansas provided to mental health facilities plateaued. It hasn't decreased since then. Now, there were a couple of times when Brownback claimed he had added funding to mental health facilities, but in fact, he just transferred it from one mental health program to another. Okay? So essentially, since about 2008, 2009, the state funding for mental health has plateaued. At the same time, the county support for Burton Ash has increased. And I can tell you, a lot of people I talk to, they think this is a bad statistic. I think it's a good statistic. County provides more tax support for Burton Ash per capita than any other county in the state. Now, there's a couple of reasons why that's the case. The key one, though, is the income demographics of Douglas County. Douglas County has very few people who are Medicaid eligible, a smaller percentage than the population at large. I'm looking at Janice because she probably knows more about this than I do. But we have a greater number of people that aren't poor enough to qualify for Medicaid, but are not wealthy enough to afford health insurance. So as a result, we have a greater percentage of our population that may need some kind of subsidy to get adequate health care, whether mental health or otherwise, and we have fewer numbers that we can leverage federal dollars to get that done, which is part of the technical reason why Burton Ash needs more local tax funding than other mental health facilities in the state. The other reason why it's more is you frankly have county officials in Douglas County who care more about social issues than would be the case in most other counties, but I might be just a little bit biased on that topic. Okay, inner jail facility. The jail is really a collection of a lot of smaller jails inside of the jail. There's a lot of separation of different types of prisoners within the jail. You've got a special handling maximum security section, which are basically the guys that you couldn't put them in a day room because you'd have a risk that they'd hurt each other. So they're in cells most of the day. They're not out in any community area because it wouldn't be safe for them to be in a community area. Then you have the bulk of the jail, which is in medium security pods, where the prisoners spend most of the day in a day room with other prisoners. The jail guards are out there mixing with them in a bigger area. The size of those pods are determined by state regs that say if you're medium security, you have a pod of X, and your staffing minimums for that around the clock are Y. And then if you have one more bed than that in the unit, you have to double your staffing. So when you build and design a jail, you build it in increments of the pod sizes for each different category of prisoner. So we have maximum security, medium security, work release, which is the lowest security level, and then we have a pod for women. Now, when Bill was working on this back in '94, we built a 24-bed pod for women. We had an average population of 9 or 10, and the reason we had 24 beds was that was the pod size that the regulations required, and we figured we'd never fill that up. Well, on the average day right now, we have 24 prisoners plus 9 we have to ship out to other counties. Now, I'm all for equality, but I don't think that's one of the areas where women wanted to catch up or we wanted women to catch up. But that's the area where we have the most significant shortfall in terms of the beds within the facility. The other thing we don't have that we eliminated as a cost moving factor last time was what's called an intake portion. And an intake portion, when you go into the jail and you get your, the stuff you put on, and you're checked out. And then you're classified as to which of these pods you should be put into. That classification process is done by a classification staff, and they do it, though, in a matter of hours, based on background and what they know about the person. Since it's done in a matter of hours, it's not always done as well as it could be. And one of the things that would make that situation better would be if we had a pod that was a classification unit where we could have them there for several days so we could classify them better. The other thing that we're looking at is we frankly don't want to add any jail beds at all, but we need to make sure things are sized so that people are properly classified. You don't want somebody who's really, really bad, who's going to reduce the security for somebody who's not dangerous, mixed in with a pod that has other types of people in it. And because of the staffing requirements, you add those pods in increments of what the staffing increments are. Well, that would dictate us adding more beds than we really want to add, because frankly, we don't want to add any beds at all. We agree that there are too many people being incarcerated, but we also need to make sure they're treated appropriately in the facility. So one of the things we're exploring is adding an intake pod that's essentially a classification unit, which would serve a dual purpose. First, to better classify people into the places when they get moved to the appropriate part of the jail, but also serve as an overflow for some of those areas. So, for example, if we figure we need 33 women beds, and we might grow to 35 or 36, instead of building a second pod of 24, so we've got 48 beds, we'd then be able to maybe keep our 24-bed unit and use the classification unit as the place to handle the overflow, which then minimizes the amount of additional beds that we build. Okay, so that's one of the things we're exploring to minimize the number of beds we need to build. Now, to get to the real topic of this conversation, that's mental health issues and how that interacts with the jail. Originally in '99, when we opened the jail, our population of people with mental health diagnoses was minimal. Now we calculate based on a detailed analysis of the records of just the last 4 months, that at least 20% of our population on any given day has what's called SMI, that's severe mental illness of some sort. It doesn't mean a minor diagnosis and they're stable, that means something severe. We probably got another 15% of the population that has lesser extents of mental health issue. So we are analyzing that data to figure out if there was an alternative to the jail for somebody to go to, how many of those people could have been diverted to a mental health treatment facility. Now, ideally, when I was exploring this idea and introducing this idea to a county commissioner about 1.5 years ago, they said, well, then we wouldn't have any people with mental health issues in the jail, right? And I said, well, no, unfortunately not, because somebody commits a violent crime or for some reason is a risk to public safety, they don't belong in a crisis intervention center because that facility is not secure, okay, which means they can leave at any time. And if then isn't secure for somebody else with a mental health issue in that facility, that also needs to be in a safe environment. So there's always going to be a need in the jail for a secure environment for a number of people, but including some people that have mental health issues. So one of the things we're hoping to do is add on a pod to the jail that would be designed for people with mental health issues, so we had some chance to get them better instead of worse when they get out. If you put a person with a most mental health diagnosis in a typical jail cell and you put them there for a period of time, I can almost guarantee you that for most of them, they're going to be worse when they get out and not better. Okay? The purpose of a jail, in my mind, maybe some differences of opinion, is not retribution. It is not, to teach somebody a lesson. It's to try to make people better. And if you miss sight that that's the goal, then you're in the wrong business. So I ask our planning team and our architects and our consultants, we're planning different trips to see ideal practices around the country. And I said, okay, I need you to schedule me a trip to some jail somewhere that has a mental health pod that does it right. I don't care where we have to go. I want to go see it. Silence around the table. I said, okay, guys, why am I not getting an answer on this? And the answer was, we don't know anybody who does that. I said, okay, no problem. I want us to be the first. And so if what we need to do is we need to go to some mental health facility to see a ward or an area or a day room that's the type of facility that helps people with mental health issues get better, then that's what we need to go see, and I want you to rebuild it in a secure environment. So we have trips planned. We've gone so far to San Antonio to look at other things that are best practices. We've got a trip planned in a couple of weeks to Lexington, Kentucky, and we'll have other trips planned where we can go see best practices. So the frustration in dealing with all of this is it's complex enough that people can often say, well, you shouldn't be putting people in jail with somebody because they have a mental health issue. We do not put people in jail for mental health issues. Let me repeat that. We do not put people in jail because they have a mental health problem. People end up in jail because they've committed some crime, and that causes them to go through the court system that puts them into the jail. Now, let me tell you a typical situation. You have somebody who is diagnosed, let's say, as bipolar. They're in a manic state. They're out of hand in the household. They might be hitting on somebody else in the family. And as a last resort, the family calls the police department to come make the situation better. Police department gets there, determine there's some battery that's taken place, or there's a volatile situation where there's a risk to somebody's safety. And the typical policeman uses his command voice. I think you probably had that situation, unless none of you have ever gotten a traffic ticket, where you hear the command voice of the police officer taking charge. If I've got a mental health diagnosis, if I am one of those people that we're talking about right now, and somebody comes in with a command voice that's in a uniform and armed, that's probably the worst possible thing you could do to somebody that's experiencing a mental health crisis. Okay? There are ways that involve what's called CIT training, where the police officer is trained not to use his command voice, or her command voice, excuse me, I'm not always politically correct. And they teach them how to de-escalate that situation instead of the way they typically handle things. One of our objectives is for all the law enforcement officers in Douglas County and all the agencies to go through CIT training, with the hope that, first of all, they'll all have that training to recognize it, but then also the hope that in each agency we'll have a team or two that they know where the situations are that have been volatile in the past. They know if they get a call from 123 Oak Street that it's likely to have somebody there with mental health issues, so they know to send a CIT trained team that specializes in that, that's not dressed in uniform, to hopefully make that situation better. Right now, if somebody needs to be removed from that situation, the only alternative they have is to take them to the Douglas County Jail. So what happens typically is if somebody's hit on somebody else, there's a charge of battery, or the guy resists arrest, which is a crime, which enables them to take them to the jail. We want to do that better, okay? And we want to have an option where we've got a place to take somebody like that, where that hopefully is a crisis intervention center. And we're hoping our numbers and data analysis will show that there's enough people that would take advantage of that it makes sense to build one. We aren't quite there yet, but we're close. Where they would have the option, instead of, giving a charge of resisting arrest, take them to the crisis intervention center. Or if there is a crime committed, We're talking about the creation of a special court that will be a problem-solving court that could say maybe the next morning, okay, you've been charged with this crime, but we're willing to divert that prosecution if you'll go to the Crisis Intervention Center and agree to get treatment. And assuming you complete the treatment, then we will let go of the charge, dismiss the charge. That's the concept that we're working on. We're also hoping that some people, before there's ever a crime committed, that would give an option for the police officers or whoever intervenes. We're also hoping that'd be a place that people might go to voluntarily without ever going through the law enforcement. So that's the general things that we're exploring and why we're exploring them. Now, one of the things we're doing differently that nobody seems to believe, but it's absolutely true. Most times the public official that's about to propose something that's going to require a tax increase to get all this done, which is going to require an election, and we start talking about it where we already have the jail design, we know how many people are going to be in this pod, what a mental health pod would look like, how that's going to affect the rest of the jail. We've got a price tag. We've got an idea of what the Crisis Intervention Center is going to look like and what its cost is going to be and what's going to cost to operate. I don't know any of that because we decided to take a different approach. Part of that was trying to learn a lesson from the police headquarters vote and the rock chalk situation. So I will tell you, we've been influenced by that. We're doing this differently. We really don't know the answers yet, folks. And the public hearings we're holding, we've held one. The next one will be at the it's the last Monday in June at the courthouse, where we'll have the initial data on the number of people that we estimate that have been taken to jail now that we hope we could divert into a mental health. It's the only information we'll have, but we'll have lots of details about that. We still won't have any answers, but we will paint a vision a lot like what I'm painting for you tonight, or this afternoon. It is afternoon, yeah, it's afternoon, barely. And then our next step will be to come up with solutions of what we think we need to do in terms of changing the pods at the jail. We have had very preliminary discussions with the hospital and with Burt Nash about the possibility of locating a crisis intervention center adjacent to the hospital grounds, possibly on land that Burt Nash owns. We've had discussion with the hospital administrator about the possibility, this hasn't been worked out yet, but the possibility of having the hospital provide administrative support and food services and a lot of support services, which would cut back the size of what we needed to build and have more operating efficiencies, because hospital's obviously a big organization, that they've got some efficiencies available to us that wouldn't be available to starting our own facility. We've had conversations with Burt Nash about being involved and possibly operating it. Those have just been conversations to see if they're open to it. No deals have been struck, nothing's been arranged, just identify that they are very interested in being helpful. So there's been a lot of preliminary discussion about the ideas, getting people on board. We've had discussions with the judges about creating a special court. But we don't have anything to propose yet. We don't have any details worked out. We want to get as much public input as possible. Here are the challenges. The people who care passionately about mental health issues also tend to be the people who care about the national rate of over-incarceration in county jails and in federal jails. So I have people come up to me all the time and say, well, I support your idea of a crisis intervention center, but I don't want to do anything that adds a single bed to the county jail. And I understand that attitude. But the fact remains that because we have people with mental health issues that commit serious crimes, that to just address the issues of the people who haven't gotten into that situation with mental health, frankly, is only addressing part of the problem the community has. Now, I should know better than to make a religious reference when I talk to the League of Women Voters, but I'm going to venture forth. And since the reason I'm here in the first place is because Margaret and Bill are in the Sunday school class that I founded, I'm going to make a religious reference. To tell you something about me, part of the reason I care about these issues is because of Matthew 25. In Matthew 25, if you don't know immediately what it is, it's a story about the judgment day and that God is separating people into the sheep and the goats. And so the people he puts on his right hand, that are the sheep, he said, or the goats, he says, I was naked and you didn't clothe me. I was hungry and you didn't feed me. I was sick and in prison and you didn't visit me. And he says, they say, well, when did we see you that way, Lord? And he says, as much as you didn't do it to the least of these, you didn't do it to me. Okay, then he has a similar conversation with sheep, and they say, we don't remember doing that for you. That's a liberal paraphrase. I'm kind of in a liberal class that likes to paraphrase scripture. And he says, when you did it to the least of these, you did it to me, my brethren. Okay? That is bedrock, and I'm on the lunch hour so I can say it, but that's bedrock for me, and one of the reasons that motivates me to do what I do as a public official. And it has everything to do with this effort. Now, I work for the elected officials that you all send me, because I'm pretty sure 99% of the people in this room voted in every election. Okay? And I have a set of 3 county commissioners right now that care about this issue and this kind of issue, and it's more than just rhetoric. And I've got a sheriff right now who's a former chair of the Burton Ash Board who may be armed, he may look gruff, he may be a Republican, which he is. But he actually cares about these issues and he's dealt with them in jail. I've got a perfect storm of 3 county commissioners that care about these issues with a sheriff that cares about these issues, that I've got an opportunity because of that perfect confluence to hopefully get this done over the next few years. Now the tough part's going to be that none of this is going to be cheap. Construction of jails is expensive. Construction of changes to jails is expensive. Buildings with secure environments are expensive. Providing appropriate mental health treatment at a crisis intervention center and or the jail takes not corrections level staff with corrections training. Okay, I'm about to fall here. But it takes social workers, psychologists. It takes people with a higher level of training. I don't know what this is going to cost yet, but it's going to be significant enough that it will require us to go to the voters to say, yes, I'm willing to pay a tax increase to get this done. We probably won't get to the point of being able to make that presentation to you all for probably another 1.5 to 2 years. But that, my hope is that we go through the process, we build consensus for most people as to why it's important, and the vote will be an easy piece. Here's the risk in Lawrence, Kansas. We have more people in Lawrence, Kansas who care and love this community passionately than probably any other community anywhere. And because there's so many of us that love this community as deeply as we do, we all have different views about how we can make it better. And each one of us sees where we want to go through a different vision. If I'm a person that's a homeless person, I see the needs of the community differently than if I am a business person. I see it differently if I'm a member of the League of Women Voters and I go through things all objectively before I reach my conclusion, as compared to somebody who is a very partisan Republican or Democrat. So people that love this community passionately reach different conclusions about how we ought to make it better and what our priorities ought to be. And sometimes we work together and work out our compromises and reach a consensus, but sometimes we fail to do that. Now I can think of a lot of things in this community that we've done right because we've managed to make those compromises. The health facility comes to mind that we built in '94 that was a result of an election. The parks and the addition of the Free State that was all part of the same election, that was a result of us making compromises between all the things we needed to do. The Traffic Way and Rock Chalk Park are good examples where we failed to do that. Okay? So the challenge that we face as public officials is getting through the process of working out all the details of the questions that I just described to you that we haven't answered, and get it done in such a way that we reach whatever compromises we need to reach to get a consensus so we can talk people into paying for it. You know, the key area where we've got a risk of maybe a consensus not being reached is the issue of that we need to do improvements at the jail. There are people, and I would guess it's a majority of people in this room, that care passionately about the fact that we don't want to contribute to the over-incarceration rate that exists in Kansas today and in the United States today. So the challenge for me is to fashion the improvements of the jail to make a compelling enough argument as to why that enables us to treat people better within the jail. And because of the pod sizes that I described, that is going to involve some increase in beds at a price tag. If we can't reach consensus on that and the compromises, then people are going to vote against what we propose because they like the mental health piece of it, but they don't like the jail piece. So all I'm asking you to do is, as we work through this process and work out the proposal, try not to make up your minds about what we're trying to do until we get all the way through that process, and then look at it and look to see if it's a good compromise about the things you care about, the things that you detest that we do, like that we have to run a jail. Okay, you got about 2 free sermons embedded in that, but I want to throw the thing open for questions. Yes?
Yeah, I'm going to take a couple minutes, but I think it's important that we look at this from a different perspective. My name is Bill Simons. I've had a severe and persistent mental illness since the 1960s. I jokingly say I'm a 1965 graduate of KU and a 1966 graduate of Topeka State Hospital, which at that time was a psychiatric hospital that no longer exists. In my lifetime, I've probably been hospitalized 40 to 50 times. I can say with increasing age, it's gotten better, and I haven't been hospitalized for about 7 or 8 years now. In 1965, when I was at Topeka State Hospital, and in 1999, when he mentions there were hardly any mentally ill people at the jail, there were 5,000 state hospital beds available for psychiatric patients. Today, for the eastern part of Kansas, there are 324 at Osawatomie State Hospital. We have more than that eligible from Douglas County. And they're accepting no patients because they almost lost accreditation because of the poor and unsafe conditions there. It's terrible to be a patient in a state mental hospital in this state. It's atrocious. It's barbaric. You were taken there and you were overdrugged to keep you under control, and that's it. You have doctors who can barely speak English. You cannot communicate with them. And that's just a fact. Many of them are not licensed in the state of Kansas. It's not required. So the hospitalization that saved my life took 40 days. And it was in a psychiatric unit at Lawrence Memorial Hospital in the 1980s. We don't have that anymore either. It was a wonderful unit. I think it had about 19 beds. It had occupational therapy and other kinds of activities going on. And people like me, who was in a very severe shape, nearly dead. I was very fortunate that suicide didn't occur during that time frame. But it saved my life. But I needed the full 40 days. In fact, my dad told me later, he had flown out here to be with me when I got out, and he said he got on the plane shaking his head, thinking he didn't know how I was ever going to make it. Well, I can guarantee you without that 40, I wouldn't have. So, I understand where the county's coming from, but I want no one in jail that has a mental illness. And a lot of the crimes, I know the headline crimes are the big mass murder or something else, and those what get in the picture of people's minds who are mentally ill, they make up less than 1% of the mentally ill. In fact, the mentally ill are more likely to be victims of crime than perpetrators of crime. The crimes that many of them commit, and I can give multiple examples, is that when the call goes out, the people making the call are basically looking for a criminal charge so they can get this person off the street because of their behavior. It may not necessarily be dangerous behavior, but it's erratic, out of control behavior. They do need to be hospitalized. I've had examples of a woman standing naked on her porch here in Lawrence. The police arrive, and she tosses her coffee. She's charged with resisting arrest and assault. Did she really? Is that her main issue? She should never have to go to jail for that. And at one time, when we had all these state hospital beds, she probably wouldn't. She'd have been screened at the hospital, and the sheriff's department, although I don't always agree with the method, but they would have shackled her, handcuffed her, and taken her off to a state hospital, and that's where she would have gone. The other thing, and I do think it's part of the incarceration rate, and we need to work on this. We're a country that represents 5% of the world's population, yet we have 25% of the world's incarcerated people, more than Russia, China, any of these countries that we would think have these gulags and police states. So we need to do something about changing the laws and getting rid of some of these minor drug charges and other kinds of things that put so many people in jail where they could be on probation and getting treatment or what have you. So I'm very concerned about this. I'm concerned about the fact that the Crisis Intervention Center, which I definitely support, but it's only, as it's being talked about, for crisis. And defined by that as a 72-hour stay. What if it's someone like me at the height of my crisis when I needed 40 days somewhere? And I can guarantee you in the latter years of my being hospitalized, where I had both good personal Blue Cross Blue Shield insurance and Medicare because I was on disability. When you're taken to the emergency room, I used to go to Shawnee Mission Medical Center because they had a nice unit there at the time. While you're still there, when you first get on the floor and they're kind of diagnosing your situation, they're already talking about your discharge plan. Mm-hmm. Who runs the system? It's the insurance companies. And they almost generally always authorize 3 days. You may get an extension, but may not. So these are some of the other issues. I just don't want us pecking at the wrong part of the problem. There are other parts of the problem. The whole system, when you consider we've gone from 5,000 beds to 300 and some beds, we've gone from no LMH psych unit. That's why people are in jail. That's why we didn't have them in '99 that he talks about. That's the problem. So we have got to get this state off its rear end, and if they won't, we have to get our local community willing to say, yeah, that crisis intervention center is a good idea, but when the guy who was like Bill Simons needs 20 days or 30 days, LMH may have a psych unit, like they used to when the community was even smaller. It's a crime, it's a moral crime, people, what is happening. We have had 2 people shot in the last 20 years and killed in this community because they were mentally ill. In both cases, the parents had called the police because they were concerned about them. How would you like to call the police to help your child and he or she gets shot and killed? Now, it hasn't happened for about a decade, or maybe a little less, but that's always there. And I'm terrified of police. And I know it's my problem, my perspective, but I know how it's handled. I've had a policeman pull a gun on me and screaming. And I was doing nothing that was harming anybody at that moment in time. And I actually got my senses together enough, and I actually felt like I had to talk the cop down, or I was going to die right there. So I've taken up enough of your time, but I like what you're doing. I like the idea of the crisis intervention. It's not enough. We need those. We don't need a mental health pod. We have got to find a way to get those people screened at the hospital and then sent to an LMH psych unit via the crisis center or whatever, or more state hospital beds. Now, I know the chances of those things happening are pretty remote in this environment, in this state. But that's what we need. And to put our heads in the sand and say, we'll accept this, is unacceptable. Thank you.
Bill,
Thank you.
one thing to, I think, make it a little bit better is the 72-hour stay that was in the Justice Matters report was based on Texas law, not Kansas law. Kansas law here is for that kind of center is a maximum stay of 2 weeks. That's still less than 40 days. But the way those are licensed today is you'll have probably 16 beds is the minimum for the staffing. That would be a stay of up to 2 weeks, and then an additional 10 beds that would be stays of up to 23 hours. And then if you get one more patient than that, it doubles the staffing and the size of it. But it's the limit in Kansas is 14 days, not 72 hours like it is in Texas.
I'm curious about your perspective of, if you say 1 out of 5, 20% of your inmates have serious mental illnesses, another 15% have mental illness. That's a third of your population.
Yes.
Add to that those that are there on minor drug charges. I don't know what that figure is.
You don't have too many left in Douglas County Jail that are there on minor drug charges.
Nonetheless.
The incarceration rate in Douglas County is the lowest of any county per population in Kansas, okay? Which doesn't mean that there's not over-incarceration happening here, but we're the county least guilty of it than any of the other 104 counties. The only county that's comparable to us now is Johnson County. Theirs is close to the same incarceration rate as ours. But within the context, the reason that comparison I think is fair is the sentencing guidelines and the minimum sentences for different crimes is different in each state. So to compare an incarceration rate in different states, the other variable is what the law says in that state of how they should be incarcerated. The other thing that I would like to mention is you're right that a lot of those issues are state issues, like what the sentencing laws are. And we have to operate within the context of the law we're in and what the judge says. We don't have an option if a judge sentences somebody to say, I disagree with you, Judge, I'm going to release this person. But I had commissions 10, 20 years ago that said, okay, if we take over something the state should do, we're enabling the state to pass responsibilities on to us. And that was used as a reason to not do the right thing locally. And I've been pushing behind the scenes, and I now can be upfront about it because I've got a commission that's supportive, that says just because they make decisions in Topeka that I don't like doesn't mean that I have to say that's acceptable for Lawrence and Douglas County. And so I think you see us taking steps to try to do the right thing instead of waiting for the state to get off whatever drugs they're on at the moment. That was probably stronger put than I should have put it.
Greg, could you repeat the question if it's short?
Sure.
If it's long, we'll hand it like
Okay.
just asked.
Yes, Karen.
Oh, yes. I'm a visitor from New Orleans, but I am a Midwesterner by birth and half of my life. So I know the mental health problems from New Orleans, and as a mental health worker in the past, I have a question for you. How long is your maximum sentence for jail here in your jail?
Okay.
Number two, do you have classes, education classes, available for the population that is incarcerated? And number three, because the judges must know that you have a limited amount of space for X amount of prisoners, do they sometimes not over-incarcerate, but under-incarcerate just to get people out back on the street because there's no place else for them to go?
Okay.
Those are my three
I
questions.
may forget all the three questions before I get through them, so I'll let you remind me.
And
But
how many nurses and doctors do you have on staff so that they can get medication at least in the interim?
Okay, that's four questions.
I'm
I can tell
sorry.
you,
Sorry.
my memory is
I'm sorry.
not that deep. I'll answer your first one first. We have contracts with both Burton Nash and the Visiting Nurses Association to provide healthcare services and mental health services within the jail. Both those contracts in excess of $250,000. We spend anywhere from $400,000 to $1 million every year on healthcare within the jail. The way the federal laws and local and state laws are written is if you end up in the Douglas County Jail, no matter what your income, you're not eligible for any federal Medicaid or Medicare assistance. So the health care of a person becomes totally the responsibility of the county taxpayers. Right now I have a resident of the jail that's going through a $300,000 treatment for a condition he has. He was transferred from the state jail to the county jail, we suspect for that reason. So I've got one patient there that I'm about to spend $300,000 on. Okay, so that's an answer to your last question. An answer to your first question, the responsibility of the county jail is to incarcerate people until their trial is completed, okay, or they're out on bond. So they're our responsibility then, and if it's a sentence for up to a year, then they stay in the county jail. If it's a sentence that's in excess of a year, then they are supposed to be the responsibility of the state prison system.
Okay.
However, if the state prison system is full, they remain at the Douglas County Jail. Now, the next question, nor is the next one, but it had to do with the discretion of the judges to consider what our incarceration rate is when they're making a sentence. Most of the sentencing they do is now on a mandated grid that provides almost no flexibility for a judge. I do know that there are informal, unofficial communications between the sheriff and the judges, although they'll deny that happens. So I do know that there is communication that takes place where some of that might be happening, but a judge would never admit that.
Okay.
Okay? Now you had four questions and I remembered three of them. What was
I think the classes, do you have any education?
Oh, yeah. We have 4 years ago, 5 years ago, we got one of two national grants to set up a jail transition program. The purpose of that is to provide for people who have been long-term residents, to provide services, job training services, to provide recruitment for, finding jobs for them, teach them job skills. That program is staffed with, I think it's 4 people right now. We aren't able to serve the entire population through that program. We would like to see that program double or triple in size so we can serve more of the residents, but we haven't, the county administrator hasn't found a way to budget more than we're doing now. I don't know who that guy is, but we would like to increase the size of that program. But we're doing as much of that as any other county in the state, which is part of the reason why our incarceration rate is lower, is because we try to make sure they don't come back. We don't want to see them again. Yes.
How long does that grant last? I mean, how long will you have the monies to provide that?
Oh, that grant ran out 3 or 4 years ago.
It's been continued.
But the staffing has continued. So the things that they set up, we've continued to do.
Okay.
We haven't been able to expand it as much as we wanted to, but, okay.
One of the issues that you raised was Medicaid, that because we have a lower Medicaid population than other counties, people can't get the outpatient mental health services that they need because they're just on that margin.
Right.
So it seems to me it goes back to your original, well, I don't know if it's original, but your thought that we have to peck at the whole thing. So if we got expansion of Medicaid, what is the degree to which, if we expanded Medicaid in the state, it would affect your issues? That's A. And then B, when we talk about under-incarceration and over-incarceration, when you look at the incarceration rate in Douglas County, African Americans and Native Americans are disproportionately represented in that system. So so my question is, what is the degree to which you're examining why that is and what policies and processes and procedures we need to be changing to change that incarceration rate? And then the third question was, what is a pod? I mean, how many people are in a pod?
Okay.
So when you talk about building a pod, what does that mean?
Well, that question is a whole hell of a lot easier to answer than the other two. So I'm going to try that one first.
The easiest one.
Yeah. A pod is conceptually, it's almost a jail within a jail, okay? It has staffing requirements of X number of people, and the staffing requirements and the bed requirements are different based on different classifications of people. And how those people are treated within that pod are also different depending on how they're classified. So for the maximum security people, they're in a cell for 23 hours and they're out 1 hour.
How many people are in the pod?
Well, it depends on the classification.
Well, just give
So
me an example.
a women pod is 24 beds. The maximum classification pod, which is the high classification, is 24. The pod that's medium security, I think it's like 56, okay? And that environment is different. I mean, it kind of looks like this space here. You've got TVs, you've got couches, and the only time they're in their cell is when they're sleeping, essentially.
Are the cells around the center?
And then the cells are around a collective thing, and there are two levels of cells. And so they surround the room, but they're not in those rooms. So it's an entirely different way of treating the prisoner based on the classification of the prisoner. Okay, so I answered your easiest question. What was your first question?
I don't remember what order that came in, but I was concerned, you talked about our incarceration rate
Okay.
was really pretty good, comparatively speaking.
I'm not saying, yeah, comparatively speaking. I'm not saying it's good. I'm saying
But it's
that
still
we're doing a better job than
over-incarceration.
anybody else.
Right, but it's still over incarceration. So I'm asking the question, because African Americans and Native Americans are disproportionately represented in your jail population, in this thinking that you're doing about facilities and pods and all, how are you addressing that issue? Because something is wrong when you can have 4.5 or 6% of the African American population in Douglas County, yet 20% of the jail population.
Yeah.
Something's amiss.
Yeah, one of the things I've asked, and nobody's given me an answer, is it's real hard to address that issue in max, looking at the whole thing. The question is whether people are being incarcerated inappropriately based on their race. So in order to get to the bottom of that issue, I've got to be given examples of where somebody was incarcerated that should not have been incarcerated.
Well, you have a number of those people, you talked about them, they have mental health problems. And
Right.
they should be someplace else, yeah.
I've been able to identify the numbers and estimates on that. I haven't been able to get a handle on examples of where somebody has been incarcerated that should not have been incarcerated.
But what is the degree to which then African Americans would be in that mental health population that you do know about? Are they disproportionately represented in your sample? What is the degree to which they're represented in your sample? Because if you've got that overpopulation in the jail, then you've got to carry that thread through everything else that you're proposing.
Right. I don't know, because when we had the consultant break down, what we did for the 4 months of data is we had the Burton Ash staff that works in the jail, we had the jail staff, and we had a consultant out of Chicago all look at every single case of about 4,000 cases that went through the jail at that point and say, remember what the situation is, what was their behavior would be appropriately for them to be someplace else. We did not break that down by race. So the answer to your question is, I don't know.
Somebody's got to go back and break it out, because that's a critical and key element to the discussion that we're having here.
Okay. And then what was your first question?
My first question was, what is the degree to which an expansion of Medicaid in the state
Oh.
would affect your
Okay.
numbers?
That would be huge. Let me tell you why it'd be huge.
Yeah, I can figure out.
If you go to the Vallejo Crisis Intervention Center in Topeka, that started within last year, that probably is as close to what we'll end up looking like as anything. In Topeka, that center actually can break even. And the reason it can break even is that as long as at least 60% of their clients are Medicaid eligible, the reimbursement rate from Medicaid enables them to take care of the people that aren't reimbursed. For us, because we don't anticipate 60% of the residents of our center would be Medicaid eligible, that's going to require a tax subsidy to operate. Okay? Now, if they change the Medicaid and expanded the eligibility, then the math of that it would change dramatically, where I would have hope that 60% of the people that went there that would make it work in terms of breaking even. So the cost of building the center would be the same, but the tax subsidy necessary to operate on a day-to-day basis could go to zero if that was expanded.
Yeah, so my final issue is, what is the degree to which your colleagues across the state, the hospitals have done a decent job, I think, of setting forth what Medicaid expansion would mean for them, particularly since they're losing their disproportionate share dollars. They've done a good job of laying that out. Are those of you who are in the police field or corrections field, have you laid that out so that the governor could see, or maybe the governor doesn't care because it's county money? But somehow people have to see that, and I have not seen that written any place, that if we had Medicaid expansion, here's what it would mean in terms of the county breaking even or getting close to breaking even.
The person who's probably been the most effective in advocating for that issue has been Tom Sloan. And when he first took that up this year, I said, "You certainly are a glutton for punishment. Do you feel a little bit like Don Quixote?" And he said, "Yeah, but it's the right thing to do." And he at least got it on the agenda of several committees to talk about. He got the issue further with this legislature than I ever thought was going to be possible. In terms of me personally or people in my profession advocating for it, I do advocate for it. People, though, that are my legislators, they aren't the problem, okay? The legislators that are the problem and the other state officials who are the problem, believe me, they don't listen to the county administrator from Douglas County. And to a certain extent, her cynical comment is true.
But if the other county administrators laid it out so that the county residents could see what Medicaid expansion is doing, in addition to getting people health care, but it would affect their county taxation. I mean.
Yeah, and they have laid it out to the extent feasible within their jurisdiction. Now, one thing you need to understand about people in my profession, to a certain extent we can exercise leadership, okay? But we can't exercise leadership much further than the elected officials that we work for. I am not democratically elected. I serve at the pleasure of 3 county commissioners. I've got to have 2 of them happy every minute of every day, and particularly on Wednesdays when they meet that evening and they could vote to fire me. Okay? Now, the implication of that is the guy that's in my shoes, or the city manager or the school superintendent, who has to always have a majority of his board willing to still sign his paycheck, is they can't get too far out in front of the people that they work for, or they're fired. Okay? Now, I've been here 23 years. I've got my points in, so I'm being a little bit more vocal and demonstrative than typically a person in my position would be. Janice was involved in another issue that was similar, and where I probably wasn't as vocal or visible back then, but she knew that I was part of a significant effort to retain our SRS offices. And at the time, she had to also keep her mouth shut because she was there still, unfortunately for her. But the people who are in my profession, they can exercise leadership in ways you can't see. But because they serve at the pleasure of an elected board, the amount that they can do and the extent that they can do it has everything to do with who the voters, for my case, send to me in terms of being on the county commission. The fact that I can be as demonstrative as I'm being with you on this issue is because I've got a perfect storm of a sheriff and 3 county commissioners who also care about that. And they were elected by you, which is what enables me to do what I'm doing. You had your hand up a long time. I'll get to you too.
My questions are not quite as complex, although I really appreciate all of this. Do you have data that shows what percentage of the women who are incarcerated, either right now or over the last several years or the last year, who have mental health or addiction problems?
No, I mean, I probably have it somewhere, but it's not in my head. Okay, I suspect that part of the reason why the incarceration of women has increased has been related to the meth problem. That's my hunch.
And then number 2, if anyone is arrested by the police in an incident and taken to jail, then regardless of whether it's a mental health issue and could be treated or an addiction issue that could be treated and not a crime, but they might have been doing something a little threatening, such as pouring coffee,
Sure.
Then they have a record. They have a criminal record, even though...
Okay, I'll tell you what my vision is, but all this still has to be worked out and planned. My vision is no, they wouldn't. They would go to a problem-solving court where the decision would mean to give them a diversion. And what that means is that the court defers prosecution of whatever the charge is. And then if they do A, B, C, and D and they comply with the plan, then that charge goes away as if it was never charged. Now, different jurisdictions that have problem-solving courts and drug courts, they handle that differently in different jurisdictions. And a lot of it has to do with what the judiciary in that jurisdiction will go along with and agree to. And that varies from jurisdiction to jurisdiction. And one of the things we're doing is we're examining different examples of how it's done to try to find best cases.
I just wondered if we had that kind of service, if we would be filling 24 beds for women, and certainly would we be sending people to other county jails, you know.
Well, that's one of the statistics that we should have from that we're working on now as to what that impact on the women population would be. And my hope is it's a significant enough chunk that I don't have to build another pod for women, because I don't want to build another pod for women. Yeah.
What is the possibility as far as training your inmates of a partnership with the Peasley Technical Training Center?
I think it's a good possibility. That's another initiative of the city and the county, and that, by the way, should open in August. Mm-hmm. And there's going to be courses. I didn't plant you, by the way. Will you verify that?
Could you explain what that is?
The Peasley Technical Training Center is a center to train people for the jobs that really technical skills, okay? We are the largest community in the state of Kansas that doesn't have some option like that. And we are by far larger than any other community that doesn't have an option like that. So the Peasley Center is a joint effort of the city, the county, the Chamber of Commerce to provide that training possibility. And so when they open in August, there'll be courses taught by other junior colleges in their specialty, where we'll have people coming in from Flint Hills, people coming in from Johnson County, and then 2 or 3 others that will train courses in areas that they're responsible for. And then the Peasley Center will have courses that'll be non-credit courses, which will be the training for courses that we've heard from local businesses that they need. We've interviewed a lot of local employers, and what they've told us is We're having trouble finding people that know how to set an alarm clock. Okay? And that's a specific example. But so there's going to be courses of just general things of how do you keep a job? What does an employer expect of you? Which seems kind of stupid, but that'll be part of what they'll do. That'll open in August. We haven't thought far enough ahead of working with our jail transition with them, but I expect that that'll happen. Hope it does. Alan?
What's the cost, daily cost of keeping somebody in jail?
About $170 a day.
How much?
$170 a day. That doesn't include debt cost on the jail.
And
It's just operating
How
costs.
does that compare to the cost in a secure mental health facility when you have, before accounting for Medicaid?
Okay, first of all, we're not talking about a secure mental health facility. He's right, we need that. The area where we might have a disagreement on strategy is he's absolutely right in terms of what the comprehensive solution is. Another piece of the comprehensive solution is providing housing transition issues from people that get out, because if they go back into the environment they're in, they're likely to recur. So another piece of a comprehensive solution is finding housing alternatives. Where I disagree in terms of strategy is if I waited until I got the perfect world of getting all the pieces in place at the same time, more likely the outcome is that we wouldn't do anything because we never get to that perfect place. So I want to fix what I can fix now with the commissioners I've got now, the attitudes now, but then not be satisfied and stop. Because he's also right that it doesn't address the issue of somebody who needs a medical environment that's secure, that needs 40 days. That still needs to be addressed. But if I try to get it all done, I won't get any of it done. So that's not a disagreement with him, but it is a disagreement that I want to get done what I'm pretty sure we can get done, and then take the next step. Now I've forgotten your question. I'm sorry.
Well, which,
Cost per
I
day.
think he was asking which is cheaper,
Oh.
put somebody in jail or put somebody in a facility.
It's a
for
whole
mental
lot
illness.
cheaper for anybody with mental health issues that needs treatment to be in any environment other than the jail.
Is
Okay?
that what you were asking? Yeah.
Yeah, and it's partly cheaper because some of them will be eligible for Medicaid, but they'll be eligible. And nobody's eligible for Medicaid in the jail. Taxpayer has to pay for all of it. I have a staffing requirement that's higher in a secure facility. So for a number of reasons, it's always cheaper for somebody with mental health issues to be in that kind of environment instead of the jail. Yes?
It seems like we're asking our police to do a on-the-spot diagnosis about where they go and in what case. Tell me, I've read that the police are going to, by next year, early next year, all have gone through a training program on how to deal with mental problems. Is the sheriff's department doing that too?
Yes.
And how can you support those people? I mean, that's a tough call they have when a family calls them in and they're, somebody greets them with a knife or a gun or just violence. They have to decide whether this is mental or if this is police work.
Well, first, your first question in terms of support, that kind of training costs money, and I'm the person who recommends the budget to the county commissioners, so I probably have as much influence over whether that's financed or not. I think it will take more than a year to get everybody trained. I'm not sure it's important that we actually have everybody trained, because in most cases where a call comes in, the officers have enough history to know where those issues are. And particularly for the people in CIT training, that's what they're trained to do, is to recognize those things. Now there's some limits to how much they can recognize, but it provides a means for them to do a better job than they can do now. So you're right, there's limits to what a law officer can do, but that is the first contact with somebody official, so we want to get that as good as we can get it.
So sheriff's department's planning to do this?
Yes, I think it'll take more than a year or two. I think it'll take probably 2 or 3 years, but I think there's some advantages in stretching it out, because the initial people that you put into training are the people who understand the need for it, support it. You're going to have some people in law enforcement who say, we've never done that before, that's not real police work. And so if I put them in training early, before they can see why this is more effective, why it's a tool, they can see their fellow officers having greater success with it, then hopefully they're more motivated to take the classes seriously. And that was one of the things we brought back from San Antonio, was the people who initially did it talked about how great it was, and the typical law enforcement mentality was that's not real police work, but they got on board once they saw the results. So I'm saying it might take longer than a year, but I think there's reasons in terms of changing culture why it's good that it's going to take more than a year.
We don't want to keep Mr. Weinaug any longer. It is after 1. So thank you so much for coming.
Thank you very
Mr.
much.
Weinaug.